Hey there, welcome back to another 4LADE teardown inspection video. Today we have a 4x4 Course 2001 model year unit. I don't know anything about its history. In fact, I don't even remember where the hell I got it, but it is going to be built up into a level 2 and going into a customer's 57 Chevy Bel Air. So obviously this is a 4x4 unit and Bel Air is a two-wheel drive, so we will need to convert this one to a two-wheel drive application. It's nice because the previous 4LADE teardown video that was published just before this one has to be converted to 4x4. It's a two-wheel drive, so I can just swap parts as needed and do what I need to do to complete both conversions without having to spend money on additional parts. Anyway, I'll go ahead and tear down the unit like usual, show you all the different points of inspections. I'll highlight areas where you need to focus on, as well as key engineering changes throughout the life cycle of these transmissions. Again, if you're used to watching my videos, especially for LADEs, I kind of cover the same things, but depending on what we find, we'll get into the details, do an investigation, and see if we can't forensically reconstruct what had happened to cause whatever damage we observed. So anyway, we'll get to it. Let's get rid of the speed sensor bolts. So 8mm. So these speed sensors are exactly the same, no difference whatsoever. And if you have speed sensor related codes or issues where the transmission will not upshift out of first gear, your first step is to investigate the wiring, the connectors, and things like that go to the speed sensors. And if there's damaged wires or frayed or there's some ground issues, then obviously fix those. But if not, then you just want to swap your speed sensors, at least for a two-wheel drive application, to see if the symptoms follow the speed sensors. And then if they do, you've pretty much identified the problem. If not, then you'll have to do some more digging. Alright, for our shift cable bracket, I like to use impact drivers to loosen up these Torx bolts, Torx 40. Because a lot of times these will strip right out if you try to take them off on an impact. So the manual impact driver makes quick work of stuff like this and reduces risk for you so that you're not dealing with strip fasteners, especially Torx. Now, worst case, if you did strip it, you can do one of two things. You can just cut using a very small, like Dremel or something, cut a slit in each of the bolts, and then use a flathead impact driver bit with an impact driver like you just saw, and that will usually fix the problem for you. Otherwise, if for whatever reason you don't have that kind of tool, you can just leave it there and you're not going to be, it will not interfere with your ability to tear apart the whole transmission. Alright, so 4x4 units have this kind of rear plug for the speed sensor that would otherwise be there in the two-wheel drive applications. 1993 was the last year that GM used a rear speed sensor, an output speed sensor in 4x4 4LADEs. 94 and up, they did away with it and they went with the input speed sensor and then the transfer case speed sensor configuration, and that's basically it. Alright, wiring harness case connector, just take a hammer, punch it in, never reuse electrical components, just a recipe for disaster. You're asking for comebacks. Alright, and then we have to take out the rear cooler line fitting because it goes into the center support. Okay, if you're tearing apart a 97 and up unit and you don't do this, you take out the center support snap ring, the center support feed bolt. None of the gear train is going to come out of the case, and you may be wondering why. Something holding it up, something causing it to remain in there. Well, it's this. So 3/4, there's an O-ring here, so make sure that when you overhaul the unit, you replace this little O-ring that goes here at the base of the rear cooler line fitting. So 97 and up, GM completely re-engineered the return lubrication and line charge circuit to have all of that cooled oil being pumped directly into the center support so that the gear train is lubricated before anything else. And what that did is increase fluid flow to the gear train, as well as ensure increased durability, especially under heavy towing, hauling, and other applications that GM envisioned the vehicles to take on that were equipped with these transmissions. All right, extension housing. So I'm just going to use a wrench to loosen the bolts, wrench and hammer. And I'll probably fast forward this footage. Okay, we'll go ahead and get these other two once we have the case on its back, and you go to take the pan off. All right, so end play, you always want to do an end play check. Here you're not really looking to do a fine measurement, you just want to see that there is some end play in the unit. Okay, all transmissions, including 4LEDs, where the input shaft is independent of any other component, where it's not pressed into a drum or a housing or something like that, they're going to have a snap ring on the back side of it securing it to something. In this case, it's going to be the Overdrive planetary carrier. So there's always going to be a little bit of play between the snap ring groove, and the carrier surface. So you have to net that out when you measure your front end play. So it's going to be hard to tell here, but you push it all the way in, gently pull it out until you hear one clunk. All right, that's a snap ring groove. Then you pull it out the rest of the way. That's your net front end play. I think these are like 5 to 25 thousandths, and you want more end play in the front than you have in the rear. You don't want to have less end play in the front than you do in the rear section. And they're independently measured, although I've been finding that when I measure the rear and the front when the case is fully assembled, I feel that's a more accurate reading for measuring rear end play than measuring it independently of having everything else in the case. All right, so here's your sticker. And this is the first integer is a 1 in this 4 character alphanumeric code. If you see a 1 with a bolt hole location cast into the bell housing in the 12 o'clock position, you know you're looking at a 2001 unit. All right, if it's kind of shaped like this with nothing up top, other than just the tip, then you know you're looking at a 91 unit, plus the other telltale sign will be cooler lines fittings here, 2 of them instead of 1 here in the middle of the case. All right, let's go ahead and flip this thing over and get it on its back so we can take the pan off, as well as get rid of those other 2 bolts on the extension housing. All right, 17 10mm pan bolts. These bolts are pretty nasty. Hopefully this transmission is not in as bad a shape as the other one was. That had a completely destroyed overdrive section. The overdrive clutch, coast clutch, everything had been smoked, burnt to a crisp. So if you want the details, check that video out. Hey, you could spin the input shaft and output shaft as well. I didn't do that in this one, but especially if you're looking to buy these either rebuildable cores or even, God forbid, used, you want to make sure you spin both shafts so that you can confirm or deny that they are spinning freely. Okay? If not, chances are that bolt was on there. Chances are there's something seriously wrong inside the unit, and you don't want it. All right. Let's see what's going to greet us when we take this pan off. All right, well, I've seen worse. It's got a reusable pan gasket, magnet, some clutch material on the pan. The fluid is like a dark red. So again, not horrible. All right, in the event you have kind of like a quasi no movement condition, or it takes a while for the vehicle to move when cold, chances are the filter's clogged. So you'll want to drop the pan, take the filter off, and then cut it open to see if in fact there's a lot of debris in there, you know, metal chunks, excessive amount of clutch material, and the like. If so, chances are transmission needs an overhaul, and you'll have to pull it out. Gotta get that trash can lid off. Alright, wiring harness. Again, you're not going to reuse your harnesses. You know, you would never do that. It's just a total waste of time. You're building in the high likelihood that the unit will come back to you, you know, if you're doing this occupationally, or if you're doing it as a, you know, do-it-yourselfer. You're building in the likelihood of having to take the transmission out and put it back in twice. So just make note of your organization keepers here for your harness. Okay, just know where they are, take a picture or whatever, and then you can just yank off the tabs. I mean, this harness is original. I mean, look at all these tabs, they're brittle as hell. And then you can just fish it through. This is your transmission temperature sensor right here built into the harness, unlike the 4L60Es where the temp sensor is actually built into the pressure switch manifold. So 10 and 12 millimeter sockets, so 12 millimeter here on your pressure switch manifold bolts, and then 10 millimeter for everywhere else, 13 millimeter here for your parking pole guide plate. So we'll get rid of the detent roller bolts first, and then just everywhere else. So 104 inch-pounds on all these bolts. That's what I use. I think the spec calls for between 98 and 105, or 98 and 108, something like that. Alright, so this bolt right here, right near shift solenoid B, you want to torque that to spec before you install your rear lube pipe. Otherwise, you'll never be able to get to it. Okay, sometimes the lube pipe itself will come off just like you saw me, you know, yank up on it. Other times you're going to need to use a pry bar and gently persuade it off. You know, the last transmission I did was like that. I had to use, you know, a little pry bar. Okay, so 8 millimeter here. Alright, then you're going to need your 8 millimeter socket again so that you can take off the 3rd and 4th accumulator housing assembly from the rest of the valve body. Alright, let's see what we got. So good news is that the case to spacer plate gasket was not sticking to the case, nor is it sticking to the spacer plate. So that's a welcome sight. Compared to the last one, that gasket's still stuck on that plate. Okay, we are not going to be installing or reinstalling the 3rd, 4th accumulator stack. We're going to be running a block-off plate. It's going to be a level 2 build, so I never keep these accumulators active. No reason to. It's a lot easier to calibrate, plus you eliminate a potential leak spot in each of the 2 circuits, 3rd and 4th gear, at the accumulators. Because if these seals hardened, or you know, one of them gets cut on the way in, then you're not going to have either 3rd and or 4th gear. It's going to slip real bad, or whatever the case. All right, if you are going to keep these active, if they look particularly wore out, the pistons themselves, that is, I would recommend you replace them. I mean, if they come out real easy like this, that tells you that these seals are fairly worn. And I mean, I'm just handling them here through my gloves, and I can tell that they have some wear to them. All right, the housing itself was revised to take a wider pin. I forget what year, sometime in the late 90s. But when you purchase a new 3/4 accumulator piston pin kit, it's going to come with the second design stabilizer pin or piston pin. Let me get that E-clip off of there. And then this should just come right off or right out. All right. Put that over here for now. So here's our spacer plate. Again, gasket is coming right off. You know, a little bit over there is no big deal. So second feed, third feed, fourth feed. No one has touched this thing. No one has messed with it. We're going to install Transgo spacer plate in this transmission, so it doesn't really matter. That one is in good shape. I'll keep it in inventory, but it's not going to be reused. All right. So valve body. Areas of concern are multiple. So the actuator feed limit valve likes to wear aggressively. So you'll want to care for that either with an oversized drop-in valve from central valve bodies, or oversizing it to dimension and installing the Sonic's true oversized actuator feed limit valve. So it looks like the pressure switch manifold wants to stay with the valve body. So you got one of the pressure switches that just does not want to come off. Okay, actuator feed limit valve. The third in reverse and low reverse check ball capsules. Those are also areas prone to excessive wear, and they will not hold sufficient vacuum signal to keep those clutch circuits healthy in the long run. So again, you want to make sure you do your vacuum testing on all of your valve bodies that can be tested that way. All right, reusable gasket. Believe it or not, that's in good shape. It can be reused. Not that I'm going to do that. I always buy a new reusable gasket, but you know, if you're on a budget, it's an option for you. You know, don't sleep on that possibility. All right, so we have our low reverse servo housing and 1/2 accumulator located here, 10 millimeter. 20 foot-pounds on these bolts. 20 foot-pounds on the pump to case bolts as well. And yes, I'm wearing 2 gloves on each hand. These are 5 mil gloves, so they don't last very long. All right. So here is our low reverse piston, and then our 1/2 accumulator piston with its spring. The low reverse piston has its own return spring here. And you'll notice we have a dome style piston, which started to be installed in these transmissions in 1996. And these dome style pistons have a tendency to crack right here at the dome. And so you'll want to replace these with the Sonic's equivalent, which is a billet aluminum piston, and it will not crack. All right, so I'm just pressing down, grabbing the spring, and there goes my little E-clip. It is on the floor, I see it. So take note of the arrangement of your components here. So you have your secondary return spring, your sleeve, your primary return spring, and your spring stop. Okay, 1/2 accumulator piston. These are not problematic. I've actually never seen one come in cracked. I'm sure somebody has, but it's not really a concern overall. I want to get these seals off of here, if I can. Nah, I'm not gonna mess with it. Got one of out of the two, 50%, not too bad. Okay, sudden no reverse condition. Already talked about the cracking here for the 96 and up. Otherwise, pin length and excessive band wear on the low reverse band are going to be your other chief suspects. You can also have a lacerated or heavily worn or hardened seal. So if you have a sudden onset of no reverse, like in other words it was working perfectly fine the last time you drove the vehicle, then all of a sudden you get in and put it into reverse to back out of your driveway or something, and you have nothing, you're neutral, chances are it's this piston cracked. Okay, Sonics does make like high performance covers that I've seen, or like adjustable. They also make a servo pin kit that has an O-ring, so if this bore is worn, you can put that in there and that will fix that problem. And you can make adjustments to the pin length so that you can get your band clearance correct. Where you're going to measure that is right here between these two bolt holes, and you're going to have the assembled servo with the seal off, leave the accumulator piston and its spring out, and then you go right here and you're going to measure the depth with either a micrometer or a dial gauge or whatever from here to this part of the piston. You want to see between about 100 to 170 thousandths or so. The CK Performance has a whole instruction PDF document on the internet. I don't know if it's on the website or if it's just on the internet. You could search it, but that's how you deal with that issue. All right. So check ball locations. This is going to be your direct clutch check ball. This is the reverse check ball. You can leave those two out if you want. They're flow control check balls, meaning that they are not responsible for acting as doorways for circuitry. They're just responsible for shift timing, applied element timing, so that everything works as it should without bumpy, jerky, jarry shifting. But if you're modifying the unit already for performance and such, it may be in your interest to leave those out. I have a couple of videos that discuss specifically what to do and when to do it, but suffice to say, it's an option for you as well. Okay, on your feed bolt for your intermediate 12.38 socket, new bolts will come in your overhaul / paper rubber kit. Okay, Torx 40 on your Overdrive feed bolt. And then 13 millimeters for your parking pole guide plate. Leave this little spring that's holding the pole back in place so that you can get the gear train out. It's not interfering with you. And then for your retention pin here, the selector shaft, you want to get a pry bar about the length of this one, get right up underneath of it, and then make sure you have good purchase, and just simply use your hand to pop it out. Now here's that E-clip that fell on the ground. So that's going to be for the low reverse servo. Okay, 15 millimeter here on your manual shift shaft nut to rooster comb. Oops. Slippery hands. Alright, and don't let me forget the extension housing. You have to get that off of there. So here is how it goes. Okay, you got your manual valve engagement stud, and then the parking rod assembly and rooster comb. Alright, so now I'm going to yank off the extension housing, get these last two bolts dealt with. 15 millimeter. I know there's sockets that you can buy and use in combination with certain ratchets and such to get at these bolts in, you know, kind of confined spaces like this. I just don't have a set. It's on my list of priorities to pick up such a set, but right now I don't have it. Alright, so all of these bolts have some sort of thread locker on them. It's not really necessary. I mean, you can install it if you want, but it's not super critical in my opinion. So the other 4L80E that I tore down about a week or so before this one is going to be a 4x4 application. So it's going to be made into an MP205 transfer case. So I actually have to talk to the customer. It's been ages since I've done a job like that to see if this extension housing can be used or if it's going to require something different. So, you know, we'll see, but hopefully he could use that factory one, and like I said, I can just switch the two-wheel drive housing off that other unit onto this one. Now, you'll notice back here, now let me zoom in so you can see. You notice we have a cup plug. Okay, this is still in production. You can buy this. So if you're looking to convert a two-wheel drive unit to a 4x4, you're going to need to replace the pinhole lube seal that goes here that lubricates the extension housing bushing in two-wheel drive 4L80s with this little cup plug so that you don't have fluid hemorrhaging into the 4x4 adapter. You lose all your fluid or it ends up in the transfer case. All right, now that we got that out of the way, we can go ahead and empty the case. So check your surfaces in here. Okay, make sure that there's no scoring. Nothing that would lead you to believe that you might be at risk of having your seals get cut once, you know, transmission goes back in working. Okay, 13 millimeter here for pump to case, 18 to 20 foot-pounds on these bolts. All right, we'll see what kind of condition the pump working surfaces are in, but I would say about 80% of 4L80Es, just off the top of my head, that I've seen require some sort of pump work. All right, let's see what's holding it up. There we go. Now, there was a little bit of overheating with this unit. I mean, you can tell some of the gasket material is sticking in certain spots, and that gasket was hard as a rock. So you have your sealing rings here for your coast clutch. Check your journals. This is going to be your selective washer that sets and adjusts front end play for you. Most of the time I see 90 thousandths thick. Sometimes I'll see thinner, sometimes I'll see thicker. Just all depends. But you can buy those new from either GM or hard part suppliers like Transtar. They're not cheap. I want to say they're about $8 or $9 a washer. So you want to make sure you know what you need before you go spending money. All right, I got like a small bin of them, just accumulated over the years. So you know, you do enough transmissions, you'll accumulate spare parts like that. It's always good because you want to have those parts handy. So 13 millimeters here on your pump head bolt. Okay, stator supports. That's this portion of the pump here that's mated with the stator. There were two different versions of this between 97 and end of production. 9703 and 04 and up are the two different versions, and they coincide with some of the holes in the case. So you don't want to mix and match stator supports with cases between those years. You know, if you're going to replace this part, you want to check your casting numbers. Okay, 24203512. You want to make sure that you replace it with either a stator support, an identical casting number, or I believe there's an updated casting number that will work in these 9703s. All right, so here's our gears. Okay, dots are going to face up, and the flats for the converter hub engagement are going to be offset to the rear. In other words, offset toward you. Come on. So drive-in driven gear, you want to check to see if it's in good shape here on the outer diameter of the driven gear. You want to obviously check for cracks, fractures, check your teeth, make sure they're not excessively worn. For the drive gear, you also want to check your flats. You want to make sure that this part of the engagement flat is not starting to mushroom out. If it is, and it's not too bad, you can take a super fine file and just knock it down. You got to be real careful. But if it's, you know, pretty pronounced where you can't get the drive gear back on the converter hub, then you probably want to just put a new set of gears in it. All right, so first thing we're going to look at on working surfaces in the pump body is going to be the priming crescent. All right, always first thing on my eye goes to is this priming crescent. This one actually looks pretty damn good. Okay, both sides, they look pretty good. All right, your next point of inspection is going to be the pocket itself, the floor, as well as the inner diameter here where I'm, you know, wiping down. All right, you want to check that, make sure it's not scored up, heavily worn, you know, whatever the case may be. Okay, everything appears to look good in here, but I'm going to be honest with you, I don't really do any serious inspections of any parts until I've had a chance to clean them all off. All right, you don't really want to do inspections where you're going to make decisions about the serviceability of hard parts while they're dirty like this. Okay, first stator, check in here, inner diameter, make sure there's no ring cut. Okay, these are original bushings. Check your working surface. We have one pronounced groove right here. That appears to be where the driven gear rides upon. And you want to run your fingernail across such grooving. If you can't feel the groove with your fingernail, you know, once it's clean without a glove on, then that's just witness marks, and it's not going to hurt anything. The other thing you want to do is take a straight edge. So take a straight edge across the working surface to see if it's in fact true and flat. Let me see if I can find my 1 thou feeler gauge. If not, I'll have to use my 1.5 thou. So 1/1000 is really what you want to use. 1.5 thou is a little much, but just for the sake of demonstration, that's what I have handy. So 1.5 thou, and all you want to do is just come in and see if you could fit your feeler gauge underneath the straight edge. All right, I'm doing this mostly for demonstration. Like I said, I'm not going to do it until, you know, for real, until these parts are clean. But that's what you want to do to assess serviceability of any kind of flat surface that's supposed to be true. This pump looks actually pretty good to me. All right, let's go ahead and put that back on for just real quick. I know the seal's in the way, but you have your drain back. This is going to be right here. Drill this out to 1/4 of an inch, and then of course replace your bushing. See if there's anything else I need to mention about the pump while I'm at it. Splines, check your engagement splines for your converter. They look okay again at a glance. All right, overdrive section. So here's your bearing for your forward drum. That goes right here, it goes like that. We'll leave it in there for now. Okay, here's your planet, your input shaft, and then here is that play that I was referring to earlier. See where that input shaft's moving a little bit? So we're going to take the snap ring off, and then we can disassemble this whole section. So it wants to drift around on me. Just want to make sure that you can see. the snap ring. So these output shafts are pretty robust, especially after 2003 they changed the metal. Went with a slightly different composition or metallurgy or what have you, and they're a little bit stronger than all other output shafts. Or excuse me, input shafts. Jesus, output shafts, input shafts. you know what I'm saying. Check these splines, make sure they're not excessively worn. The best check to do is just look here along the spline edge from kind of the rear perspective to see if it's dished in the middle. If it is, then it's worn. You don't want to reuse it. These look okay. Check for cracks here, cracks along the lube holes, feed holes, and then these set of sealing rings in particular tend to like to wear grooves into the forward drum, causing slippage and or loss of movement and drive, and that's going to be forward drum, forward clutch burns up. Check these splines as well, and then of course your journals. Sloppy handling parts. Okay, so overdrive roller one-way clutch rotation is going to be freewheel counterclockwise, and it's going to lock clockwise. All right, the reason for that is because this whole assembly is facing rearward. If it was facing front, like this in the case, it would freewheel clockwise. Okay, so we have a large roller style assembly. Now in 01 they moved to the smaller diameter roller clutch deal, where this changed, and if you want to if you want to prospectively install an earlier style with the large rollers into a later model unit that had the small roller design, you got to swap both the drum, this, and the planet, or at least change out the race to a thicker one, or a thinner one, I should say, just like this, to make that all work. So let me rehash that so it's a little bit clearer. So these three components here represent a service pack, and service pack is basically a group of components that are designed to work together. So if you want to take a large roller overdrive clutch design and install it into a later 4L80E that came with the smaller roller clutch design, you need to take these three parts from an older 4L80E and prospectively install them into that later unit. Okay, so sorry if there was some confusion initially, talking too fast, trying to not waste too much time. So let's take a look at our coast clutch. So 3 frictions, 3 steels, tubular, Borg-Warner. These look okay, no issues there. And then you have a bonded piston that gets replaced during overhaul. No selectives in this clutch. And then for your planet, these can be overhauled without any kind of special tooling. You just need the parts, so check for side play, make sure there is none, and then check vertical play. All right, eyeball the condition of the teeth on all your gears. Okay, check the surface here for your outer roller clutch race. Make sure it's not boogered up or scored or scratched. Same thing with the captured bearing. Make sure it spins nice and free. Put a little pressure on it. You don't want to hear any noises there. Okay, like I said, you can overhaul this yourself. Check journal, check the flange here, or thrust surface, and then check your lugs for your coast clutch. Okay, that planet looks to be in good shape to me. All right, overdrive section. Okay, so and I believe 01 and up, they changed this this housing and the backing plate to incorporate a stabilizer pin flange so that it can mesh with the stabilizer pin that was installed in these cases starting in that year. Okay, so overdrive clutch, again, no selectives. The clearance is what it is. Usually around like 40 to 50 thousandths. That's what I typically see. This clutch looks in good shape. Okay, check backing plate, make sure it's in good shape. Same with the coast clutch, I'm gonna check the backing plates. All right, and then for your clutch housing and apply piston, very easy to get this off in most cases without having to resort to like a press or something. So just come like this, fact, I'll point out something here. Whoever built this transmission, they did not engage all the locking bosses. So obviously that is not automatically going to translate to the snap ring popping out. I mean, there's multiple locking bosses in this thing, but you also don't want to take the chance. So you want to make sure that every single locking boss is engaged on all of these return spring assemblies for all transmissions that have them, so that you're not, again, building in unnecessary risk to the job. All right, give it up. Okay, return spring assembly, pretty straightforward. Very rare are these damaged in any significant way. Okay, there are special tools that allow you to mesh these two once you install the new lip seals. You really don't need those tools. You can just use either the forward or direct drum to support the two components while you mesh them together. So just like that, put the drum underneath the piston so you can support that while you work the seals between the piston and the housing. So pretty easy deal once you've done it a couple of times. All right, forward drum, direct drum. Grab that up kind of awkward. Coast band changed as well. So you have the wider band. These can be retroed. They're earlier 4LADEs, as long as you retro both the band and the servo piston and return spring, because they're not the same. So just keep that in mind. So here is that bearing. And then, like I mentioned a little bit ago, the main problem with the forward drums are going to be ring cut here in the inner diameter, and we can see some pronounced ring cut on this particular drum. So the remedy is to simply either do it yourself or take it to a machinist, bore out the inner diameter, and then install a sleeve in it. And all my level 2 builds have that, because I have plenty of bad drums, so I just take him to the machinist and have him sleeve those drums so that won't be a problem. Okay, thrust washers here on the forward clutch hub. This is really the only major hard part weakness in my opinion. I always replace it with a Sonics billet hub. You can use ones from TSR, and there's a few other companies that make them. One company in particular has a double bearing setup where it's machined to take bearings on the inboard and outboard side of the hub, which is pretty cool. All right, so here is your forward clutch cushion plate. This is different than the one in the direct. The forward clutch typically looks like this. The direct usually has a wide opening between these lugs. All right, so bottom steel, and then your plate, and then this side was against the piston. You can see here the witness mark all the way around. Okay, forward clutch looks in decent shape. No concerns. And then check backing plate. Again, looks perfect to me. Check lugs on the hub. Check your engagement lugs for the drum itself. And then let me see if I can get a shot real quick before I have to change the battery out of all of that ring cut. Yeah, that should do it. You can see that ring cut up in there. Looks pretty bad. So this drum will be repaired. All right, got a fresh battery in. So took a couple of seconds to pull off the snap ring. So here is the forward piston. On all the OEM pistons, it'll literally have the word forward stamped into the underside, so you don't mix it up with the direct piston. Also, this area here is markedly narrower, the overall diameter of the crown portion compared to the direct clutch piston. So feeling these surfaces, they actually feel kind of hardened in spots. That forward clutch was probably going to burn within the next 10,000 miles or so of, operation. Okay, return spring assemblies for the forward and direct clutch are all the same. So no need to worry about mixing them up. Same with the snap rings that retain them. Check your working surfaces here. Make sure that there's no scoring where the seals ride upon. This particular seal here is intended for purposes of timing of engagement. So it's, again, like a dam, partitioning the two chambers of the piston. If it's a little bit worn, it's not the end of the world. If you don't replace that seal, again, don't worry about it. It's not the end of the world if that seal is a little worn. I've never had a 480 come back because I failed to replace the seal there. Okay, so you have a Babbitt style thrust washer here on the inboard side, and outboard side you have plastic washer. And the other 480 I had these Babbitt style washers in both positions, which I thought was interesting. So if you're going to reuse your hub, just check the lugs, make sure they're okay, make sure they're not screwed up. Again, common sense. Okay, direct clutch. So direct clutch is a source of frequent failures in these units. For anything high performance, you want to make sure you dual feed this clutch. And when I say dual feed, what I really mean is open up the entire underside of the piston, both chambers, for apply fluid when in third gear. You're only going to send one stream of apply fluid, or it's going to only receive one conduit's worth of apply fluid, unless you run either the Transgo HD2 kit, which I don't recommend for other reasons, or Jake's Performance's Recal kit, which his plate, which is a traditional spacer plate, it sends two discrete streams of fluid to this piston, both into the inner chamber and the outer chamber. In the factory configuration, the only port of this piston that sees fluid is the inner chamber. So I think that's kind of a miss on GM's part. They missed an opportunity to make this clutch much, much stronger. All right, so here's a direct clutch plate. Okay, looks like it's the same as the forward clutch as far as wavy plates are concerned. But as you can see, the coloration's different. Okay, these are said to be calibrated differently. So you can really eyeball them if you want to, put that theory to the test, but they're said to be calibrated differently, and I believe they are in situations where you have that one cushion plate with the wide gap. Again, my other 4LED video I just did has that. All right, so here's your direct clutch, and then here's your forward clutch. And then let me take out the snap ring. Again, you want to check to see all four locking bosses engaged. They are on this one. And then we'll disassemble the sprag once we have the drum empty. All right. Snap ring fell on the floor. Got a little dirty. So identical return spring assemblies. If you're going to run Transgo's HD2 kit, I would not recommend you actually, like I said, I don't recommend that kit at all. It's too many components that I don't like, but if you are, they come with high rate return springs for the direct clutch return spring assembly, and I would definitely recommend installing those for anything high performance. So here's our piston, a little bit of clutch material on the inside, but it is this area here that is going to see apply fluid in third gear. Okay, this portion of the piston here will not see any apply fluid, so that's why dual feeding is so popular. So to dual feed this clutch using what I call the cup plug method, you're only going to do 3 steps. Okay, you're going to leave out this seal here in the drum. Okay, no reason to put that in. You're going to leave the second from the top sealing ring off of the center support, and then you're going to plug the high reverse feed passage in the case. So that is the feed passage immediately to the right of the intermediate feed bolt if you're looking at the case as if it was standing upright on the bench. Okay, it's starting to harden here on the outer sealing surface. It's in spots. So, after so many miles, once these pistons starting to harden, I mean, that's basically it. The countdown to extinction, so to speak, has begun for that particular clutch. All right, here's our spiral lock snap ring. This is a great upgrade for those building TH400s for any kind of performance use, so that you don't have the traditional snap ring, popping out on you. I don't know how big of a problem that is, to be perfectly honest. I've always installed this particular snap ring on any TH400 that I do. I mean, I have a ton of these in inventory, but so sprag rotation is going to be clockwise, freewheel, lock, counterclockwise. So BorgWarner 34 element heavy duty sprag. Always retro this to all early 4L80Es and any TH400s where direct drums have the smooth inner race like this. I believe 64 to 70 is when they were installed. It's maybe 64 to 71, and after 1970 or 1971 they went with that 8 element roller clutch design with a cam on the drum, so it's like you can't really use that drum if you want to install a dog bone style sprag. And this is going to be stubborn for some reason. I don't know why. So I'll mess with it later, but I don't want a huge laundry list of shit that I'm going to have to deal with quote unquote later, because later is going to be about maybe a half hour from now when I'm trying to clean all this crap off. Well, guess what? I'll deal with it later. So check your inner diameter, make sure that your sealing surfaces aren't messed up in any way, scored, etc. Make sure your bleeder ball is working. Just shake it and watch the ball move. You're not going to be able to hear it so much, but you can see it. Check in here for ring cut from the sealing rings on the center support stator, and then check the race here for your sprag. Make sure it's nice and mirrory smooth. This drum looks perfect. For real high RPM applications, a lot of power, you're going to want to drill a little supplementary bleeder orifice. I recommend between 50 and 65 thousandths. And you can drill it wherever. I like to drill it 180 degrees out on the opposite side of the drum from the factory bleeder bowl. Okay, always replace your one-way assembly. So this sprag, the overdrive roller, and the low roller clutch will be replaced. We do not reuse that stuff. All right, I'll put it here for now. All right. So getting there with this teardown. So we have a center support snap ring that has to come out, and then from there we have the entirety of the gear train as well as the intermediate clutch. So you can use a couple of different things to get at these deep in-case snap rings. You can use a pick like this as a snap-on pick. I think it's a radiator hose pick of some sort. Or you can use a long screwdriver where you cut a little notch in the blade at the end to grab up on the snap rings. So I'll go with this one first, see if we can get to it. So it's going to be the intermediate clutch snap ring and the intermediate clutch first. Okay, never reuse this snap ring in any performance application. It's too weak and flimsy in my opinion. Install a 727 or a Chrysler 8518 Ford clutch selective snap ring instead. All right, that is what I believe what Transgo and others include in their performance kits. And you're going to find yourself using the 88 thousandths thick version most often. There's 6 or 7 different thicknesses available for that clutch snap ring. 75 thousandths, I'll use that every once in a while. 106 thou is what I typically use for the TH400s with the 3 clutch stack and the super thick backing plate. These backing plates changed in 4L80Es as well. There was an earlier backing plate, a little bit thicker, and then you have the late backing plate, which is, well, thin. Sonics makes a heavy-duty backing plate to use in lieu of the factory plate, and this one will receive that Sonics piece. So a little bit of slippage here in the intermediate clutch, but nothing overly concerning. Now, a little bit of slip marks is normal, especially for a high mileage unit. Doesn't necessarily mean that the driver would have felt it. It just means that there was some slip. All right, see if I can get at this. Oh wait, let me get that. Let me get that cushion plate out of there. All right, so here's your cushion plate. So for center support, you do always want to install the cushion plate unless you're doing something real exotic in the intermediate clutch here. I don't think I've left one out in quite a while where they are present. Alright, this is a beveled snap ring. It can be kind of, you know, kind of ornery. Want to fight you. Of course, always when I'm filming this kind of stuff happen. Alright, so beveled, and pretty much almost invariably across all transmissions, at least automatic transmissions, where you have a snap ring that's beveled like this, either in a case or, you know, on a housing of some sort. The bevel usually faces either forward or up. This is no different. Alright, now for the gear train, what I like to do is come in and I'll grab all three parts here, the stator, the sun gear shaft, and the main shaft with one hand, and at the other hand I'm going to just push everything forward. And I'm going to push and lift at the same time so that I don't accidentally allow the gear train to drop and crash onto the case. Alright, so the back of 4 LADEs, just like TH400s, you're going to have a 4-tab Babbitt washer that goes on the output shaft flange, and then you're going to have a selective steel 3-tab washer that goes between the Babbitt washer and the back of the case. So this is what adjusts and sets your rear end play. Again, I have a whole drawer full of those because I never reuse them. So to rollerize the rear of the case, all you're going to do is buy yourself a TH350 pump bearing kit. The kit will come with the bearing itself and 2 or 3 shims. I think it comes with 3 shims. The shims are going to be 10 thou, 15 thou, and 20 thousandths thick. Alright, first let me empty the case. So we have our rear band and we have our anti-fretting ring. The anti-fretting ring comes out first. This is to protect the case from the center support. It kind of just goes right here. And anti-fretting rings begin to be installed in TH400 sometimes in the early 70s. And it's best practice that if you're working on a very early TH400, something like 64 to, I think maybe 69 or 70, and it has the thick lug center support with no anti-fretting ring, you want to install an anti-fretting ring with a later center support. Okay, band, again, looks about the same as all the other applied elements in here, all the other friction components. Normal wear, nothing unusual. Pretty clean core. Alright, and that should be it. Alright. Oh, wait, you know what? That's not it. So I did this in the last teardown. I said to myself, I'm not going to forget it this time. This rear case snap ring and seal need to come out. Alright, and then now our seal. So I just go like this, and you can take a hammer if you want. Or you can go like this. And you'll eventually get the seal out. Alright, now that this is empty, you can stand it up. It's pretty dirty, but most of this dirt appears to be soft, so it'll come off under pressure washing. All right, so let's go ahead and go through the gear train. First thing you want to notice here is a band surface for your low reverse band here on the front plan, and make sure it's not scored up or warped. This one looks in good shape. Then you can start taking stuff off. So center support. So low roller clutch rotation. when you're holding, the rest of the gear train, the center support is going to spin, free spin counterclockwise, and then the roller clutch is such it'll lock clockwise and bring the front planet with it as it spins. So freewheel, and then lock. So it looks like some gear shaft's going to come with. So you have your roller clutch there. So notice the color here on the sun gear shaft. You'll notice indexing line here, or indexing mark in the splines for the sun gear. This is the inboard portion, the rear section. This is the outboard or front section. This indicates a 99 and up sun gear shaft. They're not interchangeable by themselves with the 98 and back shafts. Okay, here's our roller clutch assembly. Again, something we'll replace. Planet. And then we have our bearing for the center support to sun gear thrust. So bushing actually looks okay. We're going to replace it anyway, but so check your planet. Check for side play. If side play is present, the planet needs to be overhauled or replaced. Check in here too for any bluing, any heat. Check wear on the cam lobes. Check the structure. I mean, we already talked about the band surface. Pretty straightforward deal. That planet looks fine. Hey, for your center support, so should be able to pop this snap ring out by simply pressing down. Pressing down on the retainer, and just start working it free. On. There we go. So it's my recommendation, again, for anything high performance, you want a heavy duty retainer with loose springs. You don't need super high performance or high tension springs here. This is a non-rotating clutch housing, but you don't want to reuse this flimsy spring retainer. I mean, the metal is super thin. It likes to warp. About, I would say, half of the 4LEDs that I tear apart, the spring assembly retainer is already bent out of shape. All right, so we'll just check on the condition of the lip seals. Okay, seem to be in good shape. In other words, no hard spots, no tears, no cuts, no runs, no drips, no errors. All right, so this piston changed as well. 1996 and up, they went with a different piston. Casting number is 2422553. So just be aware of that. And then we have our bearings. So pistons change. I believe the thickness, the frictions change as well, but I'll have to double check and annotate. All right. Most of the time, you do not have to replace your bearing assemblies in the 4LEDs. The last unit I had, I replaced all of those. They went right into the recycle bin because I didn't trust them. That unit had overheated so bad. I mean, everything melted down. Okay. Now look at the sun gear. You have the same kind of identifying marks. So sun gear and sun gear shaft mesh such that you have the two lube holes. You want to make sure that they're aligned. And that's basically it. All right. Otherwise, check your teeth, check your splines, check your splines here, check journals. All the usual checks that you would do on a gear part. Okay, center support. That will not fit. So you have the seal there for your return lube for that fitting. That just comes out. New one will come in your overhaul kit. You have a bushing here that'll be replaced. Just check your journal here for your planet bushing, and then check your inner race for your one-way clutch assembly. Make sure it's good. All right. There are lube mods. I have a whole lube modification video on the channel where you can modify feed orifices to promote better lubrication flow to certain parts inside the transmission. I do them pretty much on every 4LED I build. It doesn't matter if it's factory or 1,000 horsepower plus, it doesn't matter. I do them all the lube mods on all of them. The only thing I will remark about those lube mods is if you're going to run in the pump stator support, you're going to install the Sonex lube regulated pressure regulator valve. Do not, and I repeat, do not drill the little 55 thousandths lube hole where I show you to drill in that part of the casting on the stator support, because if you do, you're going to have too much area for lube to flow, and the result will be a loss of line pressure everywhere in the unit. Alright, so we're down to the rear planet, the main shaft, and the output shaft. So you have a snap ring here. The snap ring is a little BT, and it might fight you. Make up my mind on what I want to use to get at it. Okay. So here's your output shaft. You're going to have an output shaft to rear ring gear thrust Torrington bearing. Just like that, and it goes on the rear of your bearing. I'm sorry, rear of your journal. Just like this. Okay, and then you have your sun gear to ring gear thrust bearing, as well as a 41,000 shim. Okay, whatever you do, do not, and I repeat, do not leave this shim out. If this shim is not installed on one of these 99 and up units, your sun gear will not be centered onto the planetary carrier assemblies for each of the front and rear planet respectively, and that will result in disaster over time. And the only question there is how long it's going to take for disaster to strike. Alright, last snap ring, and I'll be honest, it's purely optional. If you want to take this off, you can keep it together and clean everything and reinstall it. As long as you inspect everything, you don't really need to do this, but little snap ring there for your main shaft to rear ring gear. Okay, check the teeth, check the surface here for the bearing, check the journal. This looks fine. Check structure, make sure it's not broken. Notice here on this rear journal, you see how it's kind of marked up like this? This is very common. Now this happens to be visible, and when you install new bushings in your sun gear shaft, they will hang up on this area here. This is no big deal. Simply take some sandpaper, start at maybe 320 to 400 grit, and go all the way around until you knock this down, and then go to finer and finer grit levels until the journal is mirrory smooth. Very simple deal. Okay, we'll check our rear planet. So you'll notice here, right away, there is no reluctor gear for the rear speed sensor, because in the 94 and up 4LADEs, they do not have a rear speed sensor, as I mentioned earlier. So in my case, because I got two 4LADEs going right now where I need to swap one of them to a rear wheel drive and the other one to a 4x4 application respectively, I'm going to move this planet over to that one and take that planet and put it into this transmission. I'm sorry, reluctor gear. And actually, you know what? I just realized I can't do that because this planet is a 99 and up and that one's a 98 and back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to purchase a reluctor gear and press it on. So, you know what they say about best laid plans. All right, that is the teardown. Let me just move the camera back a little bit so that we can see everything. Check this journal here on the output shaft, replace this bushing, check the flange, check the lugs. Everything here looks good. All right, all in all, very clean core. I'm pleased. You know, when you buy a transmission for rebuilding that has no history, you don't know where it came from, it's just, you know, sitting in somebody's yard or the junkyard or wherever, unless you're going to tear the transmission down right then and there on the spot and assess it, which 99.999% of the time you're not going to be able to do, especially if you're dealing with like a private seller or something, and you're not buying it from a core supplier you have a good relationship with, you know, it's really luck of the draw. I have a video on how to buy a used 4L80E where you can do all the checks that I show you to do in that video with the transmission fully assembled, so that you can at least grab the low-hanging fruit and set it aside. You know, shafts aren't spinning, they're locked up. Obviously, that's not a core you want to bring home with you. There's other things like, you know, broken case, you know, just check the case over after it's clean, but a lot of times it's obvious if there's damage to the case, and if so, you obviously want to reject that unless you get it for free or something. Then I'd probably just take it and hope the hard parts are good. And then I can replace the case for the cost it would have, you know, I'd be into it for the core or whatever. All right, other than that, I mean, there's nothing really to say about this one other than I'm pleased that it's as clean as it is. There's really not much I need to do. The only damage to speak of is really that forward drum. That's got ring cut, so we'll go ahead and sleeve that, but that's basically it. I'll have to check the pump for sure. I have to vacuum test the valve body and the pump, so the caveats there that we don't know the condition of hydraulic circuitry yet, but from visual physical inspection, a priori, we should not be into this core for very much. Everything is in good shape based on what we were able to see and look at. All right, guys, as always, thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them below. I'm always doing 4L80E, so if there's anything that you want me to talk about, any topic you want me to cover in more detail about the 4L80E transmission, just put it in the comments and I'll prioritize it for a future video. Till then, enjoy the rest of your day or evening. Thanks so much again for watching. I greatly appreciate all of your viewership and all of your time spent on my channel. Thanks again.